there's something else happening in the building today. And so rather than give my little opening, I'm going to defer to our congressional House caucus leaders, founders, Congresswoman Brooks from Indiana and Joe Kennedy from Massachusetts. They have been remarkable. The last couple of years, putting together this caucus, they recognize, what's the matter?
You need to push the button.
Well,
It's on.
is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
They have been remarkable. They have asked us to have briefings in the House. They've come to forums. They were with us yesterday. Really, we don't want to overwork our welcome, but the fact is we are so blessed to have these two congressmen working so hard on behalf of the three now, what three? Oh, Fred, okay. He went to he told me I'm sort of got to clone myself, but Fred Upton is also here. And to have the four of them working this hard on our behalf, the behalf of legal services and access to justice across the country is a terrific thing. It's a terrific thing for the House. You're seeing it now. I hope you in your own offices in this building recognize that this is not only a bipartisan, it is a nonpartisan matter. It's our heritage. The justice system belongs to the American people. It doesn't just belong to the lawyers. And I said yesterday, equal justice is not charity. It's our responsibility to future generations to make sure that the rule of law that we inherited is turned over to them. And there's no way that's going to be happening if we leave so many people out. So it is my privilege to introduce Congressman Joe Kennedy from Massachusetts, and he's going to, and you guys figure out how you're going to do it, okay? Okay.
I'm Fred Upton. I just want to say I've been involved with this group for a long time. I joined with Jim Ramstad back in the 90s to make sure that our side won when there were efforts to really go after legal services, and we did. It was a tough battle, but we did. It's called Justice for All, and that's still our theme today. But I want to say, even though we have great news, 25% increase in the omnibus bill that the president signed, it's not over. We got next fiscal year, but we also have this idea that's been floating around about a rescission. This could be on that target list. So, you know, we're not ready to quite pop the champagne yet because we got to make sure that we have your backs, and I certainly am committed. We have a great team. The three of us plus Debbie Dingell, as you know, our committee is the four of us happen to be on the best committee in the world. Energy and Commerce, we have this little issue upstairs with Facebook, which is going on, and there's a little bathroom break, which is why we're here now. But I just want to say thanks, but the fight's not over, and we got to be engaged. It is bipartisan, as it should be. Justice for all. Joe?
Chairman, thank you. Chairman, thank you. Chairman, one of the things I've learned about being a junior member of Congress. Thank you for your commitment to this. I know this is an issue that you have been passionate about for a long time. Many of you were at the reception last night where I credited my colleague Susan Brooks for all the work that she has done together. To be very candid, to have two junior members of Congress leading this effort has been helpful. To have a former chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee adds significant stature to that effort. Somebody that is also as deeply respected as he is amongst colleagues, Democrat and Republican, to lend, Chairman, your credibility and your effort to this cause is a huge benefit to an awful lot of people we serve, some of whom are in this room. So thank you very much. being a Cubs fan is something the rest of us can overlook, at least for now.
But I have you on my Wolverines.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I'll keep these comments quick because I know Ms. Brooks wants to chime in before we do have to get upstairs. So grateful for the opportunity. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for the theme of this panel as well, and to our panelists that are here. I'm sorry that we can't stay to hear you speak, but grateful for your words about talking about the importance of medical legal partnerships, how the cause of justice for all, civil legal services, how important that is, particularly how innovative the industry has been, if you call it, if we can refer to it as an industry, given the need to stretch every dollar as tightly and as broadly as we possibly can. But it gets to the issue of addressing causes and not just symptoms. I've visited a number of community health centers, as I'm sure my colleagues have, and to think that in certain circumstances, you're trying to just to treat the ramification of what oftentimes is the true remedy is legal. And a doctor can sit there and continue to prescribe a remedy, but if you're sitting in an apartment that has mold, the way you solve that problem is a legal action. And to be able to combine those forces of innovative healthcare delivery and innovative legal assistance, the power of those two literally, it can lead to a whole lot better service for folks that are at need for it, particularly when it comes to an epidemic that has shown to be devastating to districts, Democrat, Republican, East and West, urban and rural, rich and poor. The opioid epidemic shows no difference and no discrepancy and has been a vicious attack on so many households across our country, which is why the focus of this panel and the combination of medical legal partnerships, legal advocacy, and delivery of medicine and healthcare is so critical. So I applaud you for having this panel today. Thank you for what you do. I said this last night, I'm going to say it again. The reason why we have been able to be as effective as this effort has over the course of the past year plus has been because you all are doing such a good job with the investment that our federal government is making. So more than anything, thank you. I'm grateful.
Hello, everybody. I'm Susan Brooks from Indiana. Welcome, John. Good to have you here. Really pleased that you're going to be hearing from Indiana Legal Services Corporation. But I've got to tell you, last night, for those of you who were not at the incredible reception of the Supreme Court, I did and want to, again, give credit for forming this caucus to Joe Kennedy. We came into Congress together in 2013. I was a far older and bit more seasoned lawyer than Joe when I met him in 2013, but he was walking the talk then and saying, let's do something about legal services for the poor and for the low-income individuals and our neighbors and our communities. What I think I learned in this journey since 2013, and I have been a lawyer, quite frankly, since 1985, but medical legal partnerships are different. They are newer. It is not something that really was around in the 80s, in the 90s, and I've worked with people with addictions, both as a criminal defense attorney and then as a federal prosecutor, most of my career. But what medical legal partnerships is about, and what Fred, our chairman, just mentioned to us, it is about helping those who are most vulnerable. And when 115 Americans are dying a day from the opioid addictions impacting this country, it's not just that individual that is dying from the overdose. Think of all of the people impacted by that individual's death and by that overdose. Not only is their family, whether they have children, I've got to tell you, caseworkers are telling me they've never had to go tell so many kids in the court supervision that their parents have died than they are telling them today. Health professionals, this type of partnership is giving health professionals hope because they are saving people time and time again. Not always. They can't save them always. But they said when people are getting that medical care, they are the most vulnerable, and that is when they need the most help. And through medical legal partnerships and what legal services can do for people will give our medical professionals hope that they that there will be other people besides those medical professionals saving them, that there are other people, believe it or not, legal people helping save their lives also. And you're going to learn, and this is a really incredible concept that I think is really spreading, and with the expertise of the panelists here, and I really wish I could stay and learn more. We hosted a conference in Indianapolis, and I learned quite a bit about it then and was very proud of where the legal community is going, partnering with the medical community to save the people's lives. And I just want to tell you, last week I visited a residential treatment facility. There were men there who were 21 to about 60. Many of them had been in treatment facilities many times. Some it was their very first time. They all want hope. They all want help. They were there because of that. And so I mention that because I also met with a young woman who is now on a new medical device called the Bridge, which is stopping the impulse that she has for the craving and the addiction, and it is saving her life. But she said when she was was so strung out and so drug addicted, she couldn't even focus on what was on her cell phone. She couldn't even read her cell phone. That's how addicted this. Think about that. I mean, we live on our cell phones, right? We live on these devices. But you have to appreciate that the people you are helping and the people you are giving hope to have a very long journey ahead of them. They have a lot of challenges that we are seeing in ways that I think we've never seen before with this opioid crisis. So I just tell you that because this just happened last week with my constituents and people I met with. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Legal Services. We're going to continue to fight the fight. Make sure you spend all that money that we give you because we know you're going to put it to incredible good uses. Critically important. So thank you all. I really appreciate you being here.
As the Congress folks are meeting, Robert Gray, David Hoffman, and Vic Maddox, who are becoming the co-chairs of LSC's newly launched, we just announced it yesterday and today formally, LSC's opioid task force. We've been traveling the country having our meetings the last couple of years. We rotate by tradition. We don't go back to the same state until we've been to it again, until we've been to every other state, and so it takes a while. But starting, I think, with our meeting in Vermont, and then in Ohio, we kept hearing about opioid. Tennessee, opioid. West Virginia, grantees, Indiana. The fact is that the crisis doesn't know a state, it doesn't know a boundary. We felt we had a responsibility to step up and to get our own task force together. And that's why this briefing is so important, because it's a briefing on how victims of opioid addiction are assisted by medical legal partnerships, which LSC grantees have long encouraged and partnered with since their inception. And I want to thank all of you for coming and joining us. We have a distinguished panel, moderated by LSC's outstanding and LSC's longest-serving president, Jim Sandman. At our Jim, we can all. Now our task force will be comprised of more than 25 leaders from legal and medical communities, federal and state government, veterans services organizations. The task force will highlight the critical role that legal aid programs are playing, often in conjunction with other service providers, in helping people address these issues and identify innovative and best practices to meet the challenges. I do want to introduce the three co-chairs. Two of them are remarkable LSC board members, former ABA President Robert Gray and Vic Maddox of Louisville's Maddox and Dickens. Now, these two guys, when we came in office, they served as co-chairs of a fiscal oversight task force which completely revamped our grants or how we oversee our grants. And they did such an outstanding job, we're bringing them back. And they are joined by a member of that task force as well, the equally remarkable and partner at Sidley Austin, David Hoffman. He's a former assistant U.S. attorney, and he was the Inspector General of Chicago. He continued to serve since back then as a non-director member of LSC's board's audit committee. David. And we're so grateful that the law firm that David and I know well, Sidley Austin, has agreed to support this task force. So, as I indicated, we've traveled around the country. But yesterday at Georgetown, I know some of you were there, we heard a panel on the impact of opioid in so many of our communities and how people are trying to deal with it. You just heard about it from the Congress folks. I won't keep you from the panel. But I believe this is an issue of such enormous gravity. The fact is that when you hear that kids, the next generation of kids, so many of them, are going to be without parents, and what's that going to mean for our country? So it is a matter that we can't spend enough time trying to figure out how to get our arms around it before it takes us down. And I mean that, before it takes us down. So Jim, with that encouraging comment, I'll let you introduce the panel.
Thank you, John. I'm Jim Sandman. I'm president of the Legal Services Corporation. I'd like to begin by introducing our panel. To my far left is Stephanie Harris, who is development director at Ohio State Legal Services Association, which has 3 medical legal partnerships in Ohio. To my immediate left is Wayona Nelson Davis, who's a managing attorney at Community Legal Aid in Worcester, Massachusetts. To my immediate right is John Larimore, executive director of Indiana Legal Services, a statewide legal aid program in Indiana. And to my far right is Tara Simmons, who's a former client. Tara graduated from the University of Seattle Law School, magna cum laude, last May. She has an incredible story to tell about what it's like to experience opioid addiction and how legal aid can help. I hope you leave here today with 2 takeaways. First, that you'll understand what a medical legal partnership is, and second, that you'll understand how legal aid working through medical legal partnerships can provide meaningful assistance to people affected by opioid addiction. First, just a little overview. What is the Legal Services Corporation? The Legal Services Corporation is the country's single largest funder of civil legal aid programs for low-income people. Legal aid is free legal assistance to low-income people in civil cases. As you may know, there is no federal constitutional right to a lawyer in a civil case. A civil case can be a matter like eviction, foreclosure, child custody, child support. When a victim of domestic violence needs a protection order, that's a civil case, not a criminal one, and the victim has no constitutional right to a lawyer. So LSC funds legal aid programs to try to provide assistance to people. We get virtually all of our money from an annual congressional appropriation, currently $410 million. We fund 133 independent legal aid programs with more than 800 offices, serving every county in every state, the territories, and the District of Columbia. No matter where you are in the United States, there's a legal aid program funded by the Legal Services Corporation providing assistance to low-income people. I'll start with Wayona and ask an orientation question. Wayona, can you explain to people what in the world a medical legal partnership is?
All right. Thank you, Jim. And thank the Legal Services Corporation for the invitation and opportunity to speak here today. And I have to thank our own Representative Joe Kennedy from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and Susan Brooks for co-founding the Congressional Access to Civil Legal Services Caucus. So let's build upon the example Representative Kennedy gave of a child with chronic asthma who seeks medical treatment over and over again but does not get better. And so his doctors try everything he can medically to try and help that child, but nothing is working. That doctor approaches a lawyer and finds out that there's a possible legal solution to this medical problem. He finds out from the family that they are living in substandard housing conditions and there is mold in the apartment. That is what is making the child sick. And so the lawyer is able to work with the family and get the landlord to fix the conditions in that apartment, and the child can now live in a healthier environment and do not have to continue seeking medical treatment. That is a classic example of what a medical legal partnership is. This fascinating idea that lawyers and doctors can actually work together to address barriers to accessible legal services that people are dealing with healthcare needs. And there is a true intersection when we talk about poverty, health, and law. One of my first medical legal partnership cases was almost 7 years ago. A patient was recently diagnosed with breast cancer, and she had taken some time off from work and decided, I have to return back to work as I have no more time to take off. When she decided to go back to work, her employer fires her. With the loss of her job came the loss of her health insurance. With the loss of her health insurance, she could no longer continue cancer treatment. And so her social worker referred her to me. She walks into my office and comes with an eviction notice. Why? She can no longer afford to pay her rent because she does not have a job. And so I have a woman sitting at my desk fighting for her life, and the rest of her world is crumbling down. And so I've never felt pressure like that before as an attorney. And so I'm wondering, what do I need to do? Because what I do or do not do will affect the life of this person. And so the first thing, try to focus on it bit by bit. I wrote a friendly demand letter to the employer advising them of her rights and their obligation under the law. And after a few attempts, they were convinced that they were wrong, and they gave her her job back. And with that, she got her health insurance back and could continue treatment. And then we're able to go to the landlord attorney and explain the situation to them, that this was a self-reliant woman who had been working for her family all her life, but she got sick. And because she got sick, we had an employment issue, an unemployment issue, an access to health issue, an eviction and risk of homelessness issue, all in one, connected to her healthcare needs. And the landlord attorney understood that and were able to work out a deal for her to remain in an apartment. And so there really is this true need for partnership, where a direct referral from a provider leads a patient to trust in the legal team to really address those health-harming legal needs. And that can really, when you have doctors and lawyers working together, can really prevent further legal and medical consequences. And so in the country, there are almost 300 medical legal partnerships in healthcare organizations, including my organization's Community Legal Aid, Medical Legal Partnership, and a couple of other medical legal partnerships you will hear about today. And so briefly, I can tell you to sort of give you a practical idea of how medical legal partnership functions. At Community Legal Aid in Worcester, Massachusetts, we have been involved with medical legal partnership work since 2003. In 2015, we received a pro bono innovation grant from Legal Services Corporation, thank you, to launch a new medical legal partnership pro bono project with UMass Memorial Healthcare, which is the largest healthcare system in central Massachusetts. And so when we got this grant, we wanted to put into place certain systems that will ensure the success of our partnership. So one, we needed the full support of the leadership teams at both Community Legal Aid and UMass Memorial Healthcare, and we got that. Our executive teams are on board with understanding the need for this partnership. We have a steering committee, and on that steering committee, we have top leadership folks from UMass Memorial Healthcare. I'm on that steering committee as the managing attorney, and we have a project staff attorney. So support was crucial. The second thing we did was to conduct a needs assessment of the patient populations we were going to work with to find out what their priority legal needs were. And so we came up with 4 needs from those needs assessment: special education services, guardianship issues, public benefits, including employment, healthcare needs, and disability benefits, and then housing issues. So once we had our needs assessment, the third thing we needed to do was to make sure that we were embedded within a clinical system. And so we have weekly on-site clinical hours where we're meeting with providers, we're consulting with them, we train providers on how to screen for legal issues that patients may not self-identify. And then we have really been able to collaborate with providers to come up with legal solutions. For example, we work with a pediatric clinic and 2 family medicine clinics. We got a referral from a family medicine clinic for an asthmatic patient whose utilities have been shut off. And so we placed her case with one of our pro bono attorneys. That attorney was able to work with the medical team to get medical support to present to the electric company to turn her utilities back on. Then that attorney represented the patient in her case against the landlord to fix the conditions in her apartment, including improper installations of windows and faulty system, which had led to the dramatic increase in her electric costs in the first place. The attorney then remained on the case to help that patient to get into affordable housing. And so that is what we have been able to do so far.
Thank you, Wayona. I want to pause for a minute and emphasize how unusual this model is, the medical legal partnership model. It's something of a man bites dog story. It's doctors inviting lawyers into their practices. Most people think that lawyers sue doctors and that doctors would want nothing to do with them. Interestingly, the idea for medical legal partnerships originated on the medical side. It started with a pediatrician in Boston named Barry Zuckerman, who had a public health practice, and he served a lot of kids who had asthma. And he did what he could as a doctor for them. Over and over, he prescribed inhalers and other medications. It relieved their symptoms, but that didn't cure the problem. Eventually, he realized that their medical problems were being caused by environmental exposures that he had no way to deal with as a doctor, but a lawyer could. So he invited lawyers into his practice and, in effect, kind of writes a prescription for a lawyer. So when someone comes into the clinic and he sees a problem, the doctor sees a problem that has a legal implication, he'll send the patient down the hall to meet with the lawyer and to get the problem solved. That situation has actually recurred over and over again throughout the country. These more than 300 medical legal partnerships that exist now were created in many situations because of the invitation that the medical side of the partnership extended to the legal profession to help serve their patients better. I'd next like to ask Stephanie to talk about medical legal partnerships in Ohio and to get a little more particular about how medical legal partnerships can help people who are experiencing opioid addiction and their families.
Thank you, Jim. Well, let me give you a little bit of background about Ohio State Legal Services Association. We serve 36 counties in central and southeastern Ohio. Southeastern Ohio is actually Appalachian Ohio, so we serve urban and rural counties. We were the first medical legal partnership in the state to partner with a drug and alcohol treatment facility. So our partnership in Portsmouth, Ohio began in 2015. Portsmouth, Ohio, some of you may have read the book Dreamland. Dreamland is by Sam Quinones. And in that book, he highlights Portsmouth as the epicenter of the drug epidemic in Ohio and that spread throughout the Midwest. The way this works for us and the way this works in the treatment center, which is called the Counseling Center, actually, which is the largest drug and alcohol treatment center in southeastern Ohio, many of the families, many of the people who are struggling with drug addiction, struggling to maintain treatment, also have legal issues, have civil legal issues. They're being threatened with eviction. They're being threatened to have their utilities cut off. They don't have access to benefits. Some of them have been denied benefits. If we can work with those different systems, if our attorneys can work with those different systems to keep people housed, to make sure they have benefits for food and medical care, it is much more likely that those people will be able to maintain treatment because those stressors that affect their daily lives are removed. So now they can fully attend to the treatment that they deserve and that they need. We're also partnering with Nationwide Children's Hospital, which is the largest children's hospital in our service area in Franklin County. Franklin County is the most populated county in Ohio. That children's hospital actually approached us about a medical legal partnership several years ago. Their doctors were seeing families, again, affected by the opioid epidemic. Families who were caring for children. Many children are being affected by the opioid crisis, and it's not talked about as readily as the people who are addicted. But this crisis is affecting every aspect of life in our communities. People are struggling, families are struggling, the healthcare systems are struggling, the treatment facilities are overwhelmed, the jails are overcrowded, school systems are struggling, and the children are being traumatized. Many times they're being removed from their families, going into foster care. There has been a 50% increase in foster care in Ohio in the last 2 years. And the majority of those children are being removed because their parents are addicted to drugs. Many of these kids.
I'd like to pause on that for a minute. Did you say, what was the percentage increase over the last?
50%.
In foster care?
28% of those parents are addicted to opioids. So now we've got kids who are in the foster care system. Many of those kids will be in the foster care systems for their entire lives because many of their parents are deceased. Sometimes their parents will go through treatment several times, but the children won't be able to go back to the parents because the parents are never stabilized. So when you think about that, you also think about the number of children, the increase in the youth who will be emancipated from foster care. These are kids who've been basically wards of the state all their lives. So when those children come out of foster care, they need to be able to get to be adults, but they don't have access to their medical records. They don't have access to their education records. They've been moved around so many times. Many kids are in foster care 4 or 5 different times throughout their lives. Some of them don't know how to get a driver's license either. They don't know their basic rights. They don't know how to access benefits. But if we as lawyers can work with the foster care system, work with the medical system to help those youth, to help those families who are trying to care for kids, then maybe those kids who are being emancipated will have a better opportunity, more likely that they will be successful as adults. Yes.
Stephanie, could you say a little bit more about what the emancipation process is? What is the age of emancipation in Ohio, and
Sure.
what happens to a child, a person, who becomes emancipated when they're exiting the foster care system?
Sure. In Ohio, a youth can become emancipated at 18. That means that essentially they're considered an adult and they're essentially out of the foster care system. There are very few organizations that provide transitional housing. We happen to partner with one of those organizations in southeastern Ohio. And by transitional housing, I mean housing for youth who are being emancipated. This housing kind of eases them into the adult system. But there are very few of those locations. So most youth who come out of foster care, who are emancipated, considered adults, they open the doors and say, okay, here's a list of services for you. We hope that you make it. Contact us if you don't. But there's not really a really solid support system. And keep in mind, these are youth who have been, for the most part, in foster care all their lives. We have a case right now with a youth who has been in foster care since he was 5 years old, and he's now 18. He's been in 6 different foster homes, foster care in many different ways. He's had very little contact with his biological family because they have been addicted to opioids. Not only were his parents addicted to opioids, but his grandparents were addicted to opioids. So he's had very little contact with his family. So now he's 18. He's moved around so much, been from school to school. You can just imagine his level of education at this point. And here he is trying to figure it all out. How to get housing, how to get access to medical records. He has some health problems, but we are the ones who can step in and actually help that youth to get the housing that he needs, to get the medical records, to even look at his medical records, to figure out how he can get additional education. He's got to support himself. He's got to have a job. He's got to be able to rely essentially on himself. If we can be that support network for him, if we can work with the foster care organizations, with the healthcare system, then it is more likely that this young man will be able to actually move into the adult world successfully and be an independent, productive person in his community.
Thank you, Stephanie. John, could you talk about what's happening with opioid addiction in Indiana, and could you give some examples of medical legal partnerships that Indiana Legal Services is associated with, and give more particulars about what kinds of civil legal needs arise because of the opioid epidemic and what legal aid organizations can do to address them?
Sure. I'll try to do that, and if I don't touch each of those points, please prompt me and I'll fill in. I don't have the same kind of numbers for Indiana that Stephanie had for Ohio about the extent of the problem. But we see, Indiana is a state that has both significant urban and significant rural populations. And Indiana Legal Services is statewide. We provide representation in all 92 of our counties. And in many regions, the opioid epidemic is really causing havoc. And the result of opioid addiction, kind of on the ground, is that addicts are addicts. They are obsessed with the need to satisfy their addiction, and they are not able to hold a job, and they're not able to be responsible parents. And we have not yet found a way to have a legal intervention in that part of the opioid addiction problem. I mean, we do occasionally, for example, last year in 2017 we had about double the number of guardianship cases as we had in 2016, and many of those are when relatives are seeking guardianship of children of addicted parents so that they can manage the finances and the school and the medical care for those children. But other than that, our real contact with the problem comes in treatment, and it comes through our medical legal partnerships. And the one that I'm most familiar with is the partnership that we have with Midtown Community Mental Health, which is the mental health provider of the public hospital in Marion County, where Indianapolis is, which is the most populous county in Indiana. And it serves over 15,000 unique patients every year, for many mental health needs. But we have a long-standing medical legal partnership with them, and they provide addiction services. So when I talk to our staff about what legal needs are special to that population, what they tell me is, really, that population doesn't have special legal needs. They have all the same legal needs that our other low-income clients have. And those needs need to be addressed so that they will have the social supports to continue their sobriety and to continue their treatment. So they may have a problem with housing. They may have a problem with employment. They may have a problem with medical insurance. They may have a family law problem. And those are the problems that we work on every day. But the great thing about the medical legal partnership is that we get direct referrals from the medical clinicians to our lawyers who are embedded in the medical environments, whether they're clinics or hospitals or whatever they may be. And I'm not sure if I just said this, but we have about 10 medical legal partnerships that span the state geographically, but I'm talking mainly about the Midtown partnership. So an example would be, we represented a school bus driver who was in recovery. And that person had just a very minor accident, but was, per the school's policy, drug tested. And the drug test showed that she was on methadone. And the methadone was part of her medication-assisted treatment. It was prescribed to her as part of her treatment so that it was the way she was overcoming her opioid addiction. And the school corporation wanted to fire her. And we were able to intervene and explain that this was a prescription drug. It was part of her treatment. The same way that every night before I go to bed, I take one of those what are those things called? Statin. One of those statins. It doesn't help my memory, but it helps my. it supposedly helps me from having blocked arteries, and I'm going to have to take that pill every day for the rest of my life. And whether she has to stay on methadone for the rest of her life is a medical decision to be made by her doctor, and should not lead her to be terminated from her employment. So that's an example. We work in the same way with housing issues that may come up for individual clients. And another thing that we work on a lot with individuals in treatment is, because many of them have been incarcerated, right? So we try to provide the same services for them that we provide for other people who have been incarcerated, which means expunging a conviction when it's legally possible to do that, or sealing a conviction is really what it is in Indiana, so that the person's employability is greater. And in Indiana, there's one thing that you really need if you want to be employed, which is a driver's license, because it pretty much doesn't matter where you are. There's not good public transportation to get you from where you live to where you work. There's someone in the audience from Indiana who's smiling. And there's a way to do, and many times these people will come out of prison and they'll have this huge child support arrearage, the result of which is that their driver's licenses are suspended. But there's a way for us to help them get driving privileges, at least so that they can drive back and forth to work and drive back and forth to the grocery store. And that's another kind of service that we would provide. So those are some of the examples.
Thank you, John. One of the great benefits of a medical legal partnership is that it literally meets the client where the client is. It does not require that the client find her or his way to a legal aid office. In fact, often the people who are served by medical legal partnerships don't self-identify their problems as legal problems at all. They show up at a medical facility seeking medical help. And it's the medical professionals who've been trained to see the legal implications of the medical problems that are presenting who then bring in the lawyer. One of the biggest problems in access to legal aid in our country is that often people don't self-identify their problem as legal, and even if they do, they don't know where to go to get help. This is a form of holistic care. It's looking at the client's problems or the patient's problems in their entirety and figuring out how different professionals from different disciplines can help them get back on their feet and help families begin to recover. I'd now like to ask Tara to tell her own very personal story. This is a story about what opioid addiction looks like in the United States, how it can happen to someone who never might have imagined that it would happen to her, and how you can recover with the help of legal aid.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you everyone for being here today and allowing me to share my story. I am in recovery now, but I did suffer with opioid addiction, substance use disorder, which took a variety of forms, but it did start with prescribed medication that I was given after an injury. I was a registered nurse, and I had an injury which I sought medical care for, and I tried a variety of different treatments and then was prescribed opiates, and my doctor continued to give me more and more and more to the point where I was taking very large doses of narcotics on a daily basis and trying to function. Eventually, that wasn't enough, and my addiction took another form of illegal drugs. Because of that, within 10 months of switching over to illegal drugs, I was doing things I'm not proud of. I was selling my prescribed drugs in order to get illegal drugs, and I was shoplifting to support my habit and ended up going to prison because of that. In 2011, I went to prison, and because of my criminal conviction, I suffered with a variety of civil legal issues in addition to the criminal conviction. I was very fortunate to get legal help when I needed it. That's what I found is that that is not the case for most people, and is why I went to law school, to try and help other people overcome these issues. But because of my criminal conviction, when I was released from prison, I suffered a lot of things, like my ex-husband filed for divorce against me, and so I had a child custody issue. I was imposed court fines and fees with my criminal conviction that accrued interest, and it's now, it is a civil legal issue, which I was able to get help with also. I was a nurse. I was a registered nurse. I still am a registered nurse thanks to legal help. I was able to keep my professional nursing license because the health field did see my condition as a medical problem and said, as long as you stay in treatment and you're willing to be in recovery and do random drug testing, we will allow you to keep your RN license. So I was able to keep my RN license. And also my child custody issue was resolved, and I was able to keep my children. And actually, through my divorce, I was able to get alimony, which really helped during my journey of reentry when I couldn't find a job because of my criminal record. I was, working at Burger King and in poverty, and my house had went into foreclosure while I was in prison because I couldn't pay the mortgage, but they didn't serve me correctly. And again, a lawyer helped me fight the eviction and at least come up with a transition plan. I couldn't get up from behind the arrears, but I was able to get a transition plan to where my children and I escaped homelessness. This is during the time I was studying for the law school admission test. And then all of the consumer debt when I was in prison, I wasn't able to pay the things that I had earned, throughout my life as a registered nurse. I, had credit cards and loans, and everything went into collections. And so eventually I ended up having to go bankrupt because there was no way I was going to get out from under all of that debt. And again, a lawyer helped me. Every time I had a legal issue before law school, I was very fortunate to get legal help because I was plugged in with this one particular reentry legal clinic. And because of that, they helped me piece my life back together, and they mentored me and encouraged me and told me that I should be a lawyer too, because what I found is that a lot of people in my recovery groups, I'm in recovery and doing 12-step meetings and things, and everybody there is a survivor of the opioid addiction crisis and trying to piece our lives back together, and nobody had access to lawyers, and I was really fortunate to have access. And so I decided that I wanted to go to law school and be a lawyer and help other people in these situations also, because I know that we can, if we have access to support services and lawyers, we can rebuild our lives. And so, that's why I'm here today, and I think you might have another follow-up question for me. I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
I want to hear more. How
Yes.
long were you in prison?
I was in prison for 20 months. I was sentenced to 30 months and served 20 months.
And what happened to you when you first came out?
When I first came out, I couldn't find a job. I was evicted from my foreclosed home when I was first out. I was working at Burger King. My paycheck was being garnished for the legal financial obligations for the court system. And it was really hard. And also I was facing the divorce at the same time. So, and child custody and all of those issues right when I was released. And I think if I didn't have access to an attorney, the stress of all of that would have been a high risk for me to return to using again.
And how did you get connected with a lawyer?
Actually, there was an attorney who started a clinic who came to the prison, and she couldn't help us while we were in the prison, but she came there and then told us about her clinic, and then I was able to call her when I got out.
And did the same clinic handle all of, you had a lot of legal problems.
Yes,
Did they
yeah.
handle everything?
Almost everything. There was 2 of the legal issues that they referred me, but because of the collaboration and connection, I didn't have to go through like an additional screening process, and they were able to connect me right to other lawyers.
And what was the legal aid organization that helped you?
Northwest Justice Project.
Northwest Justice Project.
Yes,
Northwest
in
Justice
Seattle,
Project
Washington,
is
yeah.
a grantee of the Legal Services Corporation that serves the state of Washington.
Yes.
So tell us about your law school journey.
Yeah.
You applied to law school, you got in.
Yes.
You graduated last May.
Yes, I did.
When you went to law school, did you have any concerns that you might not be admitted to the bar because of your criminal record?
I had some concerns, but I also had a great role model, and his name is Sean Hopwood. He's a professor here at Georgetown Law School, and he was in Seattle, Washington, and had gone through law school in Seattle and then graduated and became a lawyer. And I read his book called The Lawman before I even went to law school, and so I really felt like I would be successful as long as I did really well. And I did 5 internships with public interest organizations while I was in law school. And I was appointed by the governor to 2 separate boards where I advised the legislature on different matters around criminal justice reform and substance use disorder. And I did not think I would have a problem, but I ended up having a serious problem.
What happened?
Well, I went before the Character and Fitness Board last year in April, and they denied my application to become a lawyer because of my history. Not because of anything I had done recently, but because of my history of substance use disorder and the criminal record. And then...
And then? We're not going to end there. And then?
And then I appealed to the Washington State Supreme Court, and it was the first time in 35 years that the Supreme Court took a case on bar admissions, and the court returned with an order within hours, unanimously granting my application to sit for the bar. So
This is an incredible story. It's a story about recovery and hope and turning one's life around. It's a story about the difference that having access to a lawyer can make. It's a story about overcoming adversity at many stages. Can you imagine going through 3 years of law school and applying for admission to the bar only to be told that you don't have the character to be admitted to the bar? How did you take this appeal to the Washington Supreme Court? Who did that?
Well, another time that I was able to get free legal services, I could not afford the enormous amount of money. I estimate it would be over $100,000 at this point. Another time, I have had so many lawyers stand up and help me on a pro bono basis, and that's exactly why I want to be a lawyer too, and why I was so fortunate to receive a Skadden Fellowship, where now I'm able to help other people with barriers to reentry and collateral consequences to their substance use disorder too. It was a professor at my law school who only takes like 2 pro bono cases a year because he's very busy, and he felt compelled to take my case. And then when we threw the Hail Mary to the state Supreme Court, which hadn't happened in 35 years, Georgetown law professor who was my friend, who I read his book, and that's what inspired me to go to law school, he says, well, I'm coming back to Washington State to argue this case because they let me in. Why wouldn't they let you? So the opinion came out last Thursday, and it's a really, really good read.
Yes.
So.
Google it. Tara Simmons. So this opinion, what happened was the case was argued before the Washington Supreme Court. They issued an order allowing her to take the bar because I think you were coming up against a deadline, but didn't issue an opinion until sometime later. The opinion came out last Thursday. Read it. One of the quotes in there is one's past does not dictate one's future. Never forget that.
Yes.
And Tara mentioned she now has a Skadden Fellowship. The law firm Skadden Arps funds about 25 public interest fellowships every year. They're incredibly competitive and incredibly prestigious. That's another vote of confidence in you, Tara. Well
Thank
done.
you very much.
I want to come back to something you said, Wyona. You mentioned working with pro bono lawyers in your medical legal partnership. One thing that legal aid organizations that are very strapped for resources need to do is to engage volunteers to try to expand their reach. And this grant that you got from the Legal Services Corporation was to encourage you to reach out to pro bono volunteers to help you in your medical legal partnership. I think it'd be hard enough for a full-time legal aid lawyer to get integrated into a medical practice. How in the world do you do this with pro bono volunteers who have full-time private practices of their own?
Yeah, it was a challenge. Like I said before, most medical legal partnership, you have one project attorney for the most part. Because legal services, we are strapped for resources. So I've done everything from recruit, engage providers, train them, work with the team, do the intakes for the clients, and then represent the clients. And so when we got this grant, I was approached, and we had all these deliverables. I was approached to try to lead this project. And my first question was, who's going to do all this work? And then they said, no, don't worry. We get to recruit and train pro bono attorneys to do that. And I was excited, but then I thought, who's going to recruit and train all these pro bono attorneys? And so we put together a plan to really have a medical team think about a strategy to get pro bono attorneys excited about being a part of this systemic movement. And so we're able to partner with 2 of the 3 largest firms in Worcester, some smaller firms, and some solo practitioners. And what we really sold to these attorneys were, besides making sure that they got trainings in those priority legal needs that were identified during our needs assessment, we make sure anytime we speak with our attorneys or train them that we tell them the story about medical legal partnership. And so they understand that their investment and involvement is really connected to the health of their community. And so they're dealing with access to justice, access to health care, as well as helping vulnerable population. And I think understanding that have really made them to stay involved and remain engaged, from obtaining a mobile housing voucher for a domestic violence victim to move to an disclosed location, to attorneys who have never been involved in special education services, for example, because most of them are contract attorneys. And so we train them and let them know that a family trying to get special education services for their child is difficult. And so an attorney going to those meetings and being able to attain it have been something our attorneys have really stood up to do. So I think understanding that is bigger than just representing an individual client, but knowing the impact that you have on their life going forward have really got an attorney to be involved in this project.
Great. Thank you. We have some time for questions. Our panelists would be happy to answer questions. Yes?
Hi, I'm Stefan from Joe Crowley's office. I have a question about legal services for insurance companies dealing with any kind of rejections on mental health issues or anything else like that. So if that's part of any of these programs.
We would work. I think I understand your question. So tell me if I'm not answering it. We would work with if we have clients who can't get coverage for services they need. We will work on that issue. We'll work with both private insurers. We would work either with private insurers or with government programs. It's in fact, really the beginning of medical legal partnerships was medical providers who were having to treat people for free because the people didn't have insurance, and it was in their financial interest to have a lawyer who would help their patients get medical coverage. That's somewhat less of an issue now because of the way the healthcare insurance system has changed. But there still are many instances where we can be of help on those issues across the board.
Is there another question? Yes, Martin.
I was curious about the broad distribution from the medical field
Well, that's Tara's story.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of education that needs to be done with, medical providers, and I think for the most part, medical providers are cautious about this subject and overprescribing, but there are some, and I happen to be involved with one who actually ended up losing his medical license for overprescribing. It started out with 2 Vicodins a day, and it ended up on 12 double-strength Vicodins a day within, a matter of months. And, and I had generational histories of substance use disorder, so I was at high risk, and I should have known better too. But yeah, I think we need more public education around the role of prescribing opiates is having in our communities too.
Well, I'd like to thank our panelists, Stephanie and Wayona and John and Tara. Would you please join me in thanking them?